Thousands of years before the Wright brothers, before Leonardo da Vinci sketched his flying machines, before any human being had ever left the ground, the ancient texts of India described flying vehicles that soared through the sky. They called them Vimanas, and they described them in astonishing detail. Aerial chariots powered by Mercury engines, cloaked in invisibility, armed with weapons that sound like missiles, soaring between cities, between continents, even between the stars. For generations, people have asked a question that refuses to go away. Were the Vimanas just mythology? Or were they the memories of a technology that existed long before our own, a technology that was somehow lost to time? When the idea spread that artificial intelligence had reanalyzed these ancient Sanskrit texts and found something shocking, the internet lit up. So what is the truth? Were there really flying machines in ancient India? And what do the texts and the science actually tell us? Let me take you back 3,000 years. First, the texts. Vimanas are absolutely, undeniably real, in the sense that they appear throughout ancient Indian literature. The Rig Veda, composed perhaps 3,500 years ago, describes celestial chariots that move through the sky. The Mahabharata, the great epic of ancient India, tells of aerial vehicles used by gods and warriors, of sky battles and weapons that blaze like the sun. And the Ramayana, perhaps the most beloved of all Indian epics, features the famous Pushpaka Vimana, a magnificent flying palace belonging to the demon king Ravana, described as a vast, self-moving chariot that could travel through the air at the speed of thought. These descriptions are vivid, imaginative, and genuinely breathtaking. When you read them, it is easy to see why people have wondered. The texts speak of machines that hover, that dive, that turn invisible, that travel enormous distances in moments. They sound, to modern ears, uncannily like aircraft, or even spacecraft. The Pushpaka Vimana, for instance, is described in the Ramayana as a self-propelled aerial car, vast enough to carry hundreds of passengers, adorned with jewels and banners, capable of traveling through the sky at the speed of thought. When the hero Rama returns from Lanka after defeating Ravana, he and his companions fly home in this extraordinary vehicle, gazing down at the landscape below. The Mahabharata goes even further. It describes sky battles between gods wielding weapons called astras, energy beams that could level cities, fire that could not be extinguished, and a weapon known as the Brahmastra, whose description, to many readers, sounds disturbingly like a nuclear explosion, a single blinding flash that turns armies to ash and leaves the land scorched and barren for generations. These are extraordinary stories, told with extraordinary power by one of the most literate and imaginative civilizations the world has ever produced. But here is where the honesty matters, because the ancient Indian epics were not engineering manuals. They were poems, sacred stories, morality tales, and mythological narratives, composed over centuries, meant to convey spiritual truths and cultural values, not technical specifications. The Vimanas in these texts are described as vehicles of the gods, powered by divine will, by mantras, by spiritual energy. They are not presented as machines with engines and fuel tanks. They are mythological creations, every bit as much as the flying chariots of Greek mythology or the winged horses of other ancient cultures. And that is not a dismissal. Mythology is one of the most powerful things human beings create. It reveals how a civilization imagined the impossible, how it dreamed of transcending the limits of the earth. But it is not the same as a technical record. And yet, in the early 20th century, something happened that would blur the line between myth and technology in a way that still confuses people today. A man named Pandit Subbaraya Shastri, a mystic from southern India, claimed to have received, through psychic channeling, the lost knowledge of an ancient sage named Bharadwaja. Between 1918 and 1923, Shastri dictated what he said was an ancient Sanskrit text on aeronautics, a detailed technical manual for the construction and operation of Vimanas. The text was called the Vaimaanika Shastra, the science of aeronautics. And when it was finally published, in stages, between 1952 and 1973, it caused a sensation. Here, it seemed, was proof. Not just vague mythological descriptions, but actual blueprints, actual engineering, actual specifications for flying machines that ancient Indians had supposedly built and flown thousands of years before the modern world. The Vaimaanika Shastra described 4 main types of Vimana. The Shakuna, built from ammonium chloride, Bengal gram, mercury, borax, mica, and a mixture of sacred substances called Panchamrita. The Sundara, a 5-tiered craft supposedly capable of flying at nearly 13,000 miles per hour on electricity generated from, among other things, the urine of cows and elephants. The Tripura, which could fly in the air, move through water, and travel on land. And the Rukma, a vertical takeoff craft with ducted fans. The text described Mercury vortex engines, solar power systems, invisibility cloaks, and specialized training for pilots. It was extraordinary. It was detailed. And it was, to many people, proof that ancient India had possessed technology that rivaled or exceeded our own. But then came the science. In 1974, a team of 5 aeronautical and mechanical engineers at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, led by Professor H.S. Mukunda, conducted a rigorous, peer-reviewed study of the Vaimaanika Shastra. They examined every design, every material, every principle of propulsion described in the text, and subjected them to the cold, unforgiving laws of physics. Their conclusion was devastating. The aircraft described in the text, they wrote, were, at best, poor concoctions rather than expressions of something real. None of the planes has properties or capabilities of being flown. The geometries are, from the point of view of flying, unimaginably horrendous, and the principles of propulsion, rather than assisting flight, actively resist it. The Rukma Vimana, they noted, was a decided impossibility. One critic described the designs as absurdly non-aerodynamic, brutalist wedding cakes with minarets, huge ornithopter wings, and dinky propellers. The study also traced the text's origins and found that it could not be dated earlier than 1904, the year of the Wright brothers' first flight. There were no ancient manuscripts, no independent corroboration. The text was a product of the early 20th century, not of ancient India. This finding was, and remains, the scientific consensus. The Vaimaanika Shastra is not an ancient engineering document. It is a 20th century creation, born from the mind of a sincere but scientifically untrained mystic, in an era when aviation was new and exciting, and the idea that ancient India might have had its own flying machines was deeply appealing. It reflects the fascination of its time, not the knowledge of a lost age. And despite this, the text continues to fuel claims of ancient Indian aviation technology, amplified by television programs like Ancient Aliens and by writers like Eric von Daniken, who has cited Vimanas as evidence of extraterrestrial contact. The argument goes something like this. Ancient peoples could not have imagined flying machines on their own, so the descriptions must be based on real sightings of alien spacecraft. It is a claim that has sold millions of books and filled countless hours of television. But it rests on a premise that is, frankly, insulting to our ancestors. It assumes that human beings, in any era, were incapable of imagining flight without having seen it. And that is simply not true. Humans have dreamed of flying since we first looked up at the birds. Every great civilization, from the Greeks with Icarus to the Chinese with their flying chariots, imagined machines that could carry people into the sky. The Vimanas are India's version of that universal human dream, expressed through the lens of one of the world's richest mythological traditions. They require no aliens to explain them. They require only imagination, and the ancient Indians had more of that than almost anyone. But here's what is genuinely worth asking. Why do we want the Vimanas to be real? Why are we so drawn to the idea that ancient civilizations possess technology equal to or greater than our own? The answer, I think, is profound. It is because the idea of Vimanas challenges our assumption that we are the pinnacle of human achievement, that no one before us could have matched our knowledge or our power. The Vimanas represent a dream that human greatness is not a straight line rising from primitive darkness to modern brilliance, but a circle, with peaks and valleys, with civilizations that may have risen to extraordinary heights and then fallen, leaving behind only fragments, only stories, only the faintest echoes of what they once knew. That dream is powerful, and it is not entirely wrong. Archaeology has shown us, again and again, that ancient peoples were far more sophisticated, far more creative, and far more capable than we once believed. They built pyramids without machines. They mapped the stars without telescopes. They performed surgery without modern tools. The gap between myth and reality is not always as wide as we think. But the Vimanas, as described in the Vaimaanika Shastra, are not an example of that. They are not a lost technology recovered. They are a modern fantasy, projected backward in time. And that is not a tragedy. Because the real Vimanas, the ones in the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, are something even more remarkable. They are the product of one of the most extraordinary imaginative cultures in human history, a civilization that looked up at the sky and dreamed of flight thousands of years before it was possible. That dream, that imagination, that boundless creative vision is not lesser than technology. It is the thing that makes technology possible. Every flying machine ever built began, first, as a dream, as a story, as a myth. The Wright brothers grew up reading about flight. Da Vinci drew his ornithopter from his imagination. And somewhere, 3,000 years ago, an Indian poet looked up at the endless sky and imagined a flying palace that could carry a king home across the clouds. That image, that dream, survived in the minds and hearts of 1 billion people for 3 millennia. No machine has ever lasted that long. The Vimanas of ancient India were not the blueprint for an airplane. They were the blueprint for the human imagination itself. So here's the question I want to leave you with. When you read about flying machines in an ancient text, do you see a lost technology that science has failed to recognize? Or do you see the extraordinary power of the human imagination reaching across millennia to show us that the desire to fly has always been with us? I want to hear your answer. Drop it in the comments below. If this journey through the texts of ancient India changed how you see the Vimanas, share it with someone who loves myth, science, and the space between them. And subscribe, because the next story we uncover from the past might be the one that changes how you see the future. Until next time, honor the myths, respect the science, and never assume that imagination is any less powerful than technology. I am Arif Hassan, and this is AH History.